Prince Harry's emergency return to England was blocked by King Charles revealing he's no longer welcome to the Buckingham Palace. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. It always begins with a sound. Sometimes it's small, barely noticeable, the kind of sound your mind tries to ignore because it knows that whatever waits on the other end will change something in your life forever. For Prince Harry, that sound was the shrill vibration of a phone on a marble countertop, a sound sharp enough to cut through the quiet, late-night calm of his Montecito home. It was well past midnight in California. The house was dim, the children asleep, and even the breeze outside had softened into a gentle hush. But the call came anyway. Harry wasn't expecting anyone to contact him at that hour. Not friends, not colleagues, not charities, not former palace aides. But when he looked down and saw the caller ID, something inside him tightened. It wasn't a name, not a familiar number. Just a string of digits, one he recognized all the same. It came from the UK. Not from the palace switchboard, which often masked itself behind generic labels. No, this was different, older, more discreet. One of the numbers reserved for calls that weren't meant to pass through channels or departments or protocols. This was the type of number that rang only when something significant needed to be said quickly, quietly, and without layers of intermediaries. The air shifted around him. Even before he answered, he felt the weight of the moment pressing into his chest. This wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. This wasn't going to be a check-in. And it certainly wasn't going to be something he could ignore. When he answered, the voice on the other side was low, strained, and missing its usual calm. It was an old family contact, a figure who had been close enough to the royals to know things before others knew them, but removed enough that Harry hadn't expected them to reach out directly. The first words were almost whispered, a tone that told Harry the gravity of the situation before the details even emerged. Something had happened, something that demanded his presence. As Harry listened, pacing slowly across the room, the message became clearer and heavier. The exact nature of what he was told remains a matter of speculation, whispers among those connected to the palace, and carefully worded comments from insiders who claim to know the truth. But what is known, what is undeniable, is that the call was urgent, personal, and delivered with an undercurrent of dread. Harry's immediate reaction was instinctive. He didn't pause to ask whether he should go, whether it would be welcomed, whether it would be practical. His first thought wasn't about public perception, media scrutiny, or the diplomatic implications of sudden travel. It was a thought rooted in his humanity, not his title. He needed to return to England. Return now. Return before it was too late. Return even if it meant stepping back into the world he had spent years painfully disentangling himself from. The room seemed to shrink around him as he took in whatever information he had just received. His pulse quickened, his breath deepened, and for a moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, the unmistakable tug of duty, not to the institution, not to tradition, but to family. But duty, as Harry had learned so often and so painfully, is never simple in the royal world. He hung up the phone, but the words lingered in the space like an echo refusing to fade. He stood there in silence, hands on his head, eyes fixed on nothing in particular as his thoughts raced faster than he could process them. The reality of what he needed to do was clear, but the path toward doing it was tangled with obstacles he knew too well. As dawn approached, Harry began making calls, not to aides, but to people who could help him coordinate an immediate flight. He navigated through layers of logistics, security, and approvals, all without tipping the media off. He wanted to slip into the country quietly, without attention, without spectacle. He knew that even the hint of his return would spark headlines roaring across every front page, and the last thing he needed was a frenzy overshadowing his purpose. But while Harry was desperately trying to arrange a private, urgent flight, something else was unfolding across the ocean. In London, the atmosphere inside palace circles began to shift. Word of Harry's attempted return spread like a quiet crackle of electricity through the corridors of influence. Advisors exchanged glances. Phones buzzed. Schedules were adjusted. Certain officials were alerted. And gradually, the information trickled up the chain until it reached the most critical point of all, King Charles himself. What happened next would become the heart of this story. But to fully understand the king's reaction, one must understand where his mind likely was when he heard the news that Harry was coming. Charles had been under extraordinary pressure, from the public, from his position, from the delicate balance of maintaining stability within the monarchy during a turbulent era. The relationship with Harry, strained for years, had become even more complicated with interviews, memoirs, revelations, and the growing chasm between Harry's version of events and the royal family's silence. So when King Charles was informed that Harry was preparing to fly back to England urgently, he did not respond with the warm, familial instinct that many might expect. He did not rush to open doors or extend invitations. Instead, according to insiders who later spoke anonymously, he paused. He assessed. He asked questions. And behind those questions was an unmistakable undertone: why is Harry returning now? But while those wheels were turning in London, Harry was already racing against the clock in California. As he moved quickly, gathering essentials, coordinating with a small circle of trusted people, he felt the familiar ache that came whenever he stepped toward the past he had tried so hard to separate himself from. Returning to the UK was never simple. It meant stepping back into public scrutiny. It meant navigating tension with his family. It meant exposing himself to the cold machinery of royal politics that had once consumed years of his life. Meghan, having been awakened by Harry's movements, watched him with concern. She didn't try to stop him. She didn't question his urgency. She understood immediately that whatever had been said on that phone call carried a gravity that surpassed everything else. But she also knew, in a way only someone who has lived inside storm after storm can know, that this return would not be easy, emotionally or politically. Harry promised he would call when he landed. He told her he needed to go. He told her he couldn't do anything else but go. But what he did not know, what no one could have predicted in that moment, was that somewhere in the royal network of communication, a rapid series of decisions was unfolding that would derail everything he was trying to do. While Harry booked his flight and prepared for departure, King Charles had a private meeting with close advisors. The details of that meeting remain locked behind palace walls, but what emerged afterward was a message that stunned even seasoned insiders. The king, reportedly, issued a directive that would block Harry from accessing Buckingham Palace, the key location where Harry intended to go upon arrival. The reason? That wouldn't become clear for days. Back in California, Harry was still unaware of what was brewing. He continued his preparations, reviewing travel documents, checking updates from security, and desperately hoping the flight could leave quickly and quietly. He tried not to think about the press discovering his trip. He tried not to think about the conversations that would greet him when he arrived. He tried not to think about the tension still unresolved between him and his father. He focused only on the mission. But even missions rooted in love can collide with forces too large to control. With everything ready, Harry finally stepped outside into the early morning air, the sky still dark, the world still quiet. The vehicle waiting for him hummed softly, a symbol of urgency wrapped in calm. As he settled into the back seat, he exhaled deeply, unaware that the situation in London had already shifted in a way he could not reverse. The flight was booked. The plan was underway. And Harry believed, truly believed, that he would soon be standing back on English soil, doing what he believed was necessary. But the truth was about to hit him harder than any turbulence ever could. Because the moment King Charles learned Harry was coming, the path home had already begun to close. Not by accident, not by bureaucracy, not by miscommunication. By intention, by authority, by direct order, and by the king himself. With that, the stage was set. The call had sparked the emergency, but what followed would ignite the conflict. The story had begun. The storm was coming, and Harry was flying straight into it. As the plane sliced through the California night sky, Prince Harry sat motionless, staring at the faint reflection of his own face in the window. The glass captured a version of him he rarely saw anymore: tense jaw, furrowed brows, eyes heavy with a mixture of dread and determination. The silent hum of the aircraft felt louder than usual, as if amplifying the storm that had already begun brewing inside him. Most people imagine sudden travel as chaotic, frantic, filled with rapid decisions and breathless movements. But the truth is, once you are on the plane, once the wheels lift off the ground, there is nothing left to do but think. And thinking can be far more punishing than running. The call was still replaying itself in Harry's head like a broken loop that refused to stop. The tone of the voice, the urgency, the lack of detail, the implication that whatever was happening required him, not as the Duke of Sussex, not as a symbolic figure, not as a media face, but as a son. A son who had once lived a life where family needs always came first. Before the interviews, before the books, before the arguments, before the years of trying to carve out his own space away from the monarchy's gravitational pull. And now here he was, being pulled back in. Harry leaned back and rubbed his eyes, the fatigue pressing against him like a physical weight. It was a strange kind of exhaustion, not from sleeplessness but from memory. Because moments like this, moments filled with uncertainty and fear, always triggered ghosts he'd tried to put away. He remembered the night he was told about his mother. The quiet footsteps in the corridor. The knocking on the door. The face of his father, pale and unreadable. The way the world had tilted, never quite righting itself afterward. Memories have a way of hiding until something pulls them forward like an unwelcome spotlight. And that call, that late-night disruption, had dragged every buried feeling back to the surface. Harry closed his eyes, trying to slow his breathing. But the more he tried to calm himself, the more his mind wandered through the labyrinth of the past. The years of tension between him and Charles were not new. They were layers of misunderstandings, unspoken frustrations, stretches of silence, and moments of genuine effort interrupted by a tradition that didn't know how to heal emotional wounds. The royal family had never been built for vulnerability. It was built for strength, image, endurance. But humans are not stone pillars, no matter how polished the marble around them may be. Still, the fact that something was serious enough to warrant that call, that shook him. He found himself questioning everything. Was it an illness? A crisis? A decision? A scandal? A situation spiraling out of control? Why had the caller not said more? Why had they sounded almost afraid? And then, beneath all of that, Harry wrestled with a quieter question, one he didn't want to face. Would he be welcomed once he arrived? He had returned to the UK several times since stepping down from royal duties, but each trip carried its own tension. Funerals, coronations, court cases. For every moment of duty fulfilled, there were shadows of press hostility, icy glances from certain relatives, and the unmistakable distance between him and the father he once idolized. But this trip was different. This was not for ceremony or appearance. It was for something personal. Something urgent. Something that should have erased protocol, agendas, and grudges. And yet, somewhere deep inside his chest, Harry felt a lingering doubt. A sensation like a locked door waiting on the other side of the ocean. He turned away from the window and stared at the empty space in front of him, his mind drifting to Meghan. The look on her face when he told her he needed to go. She had tried to stay composed, but her eyes betrayed the fear she couldn't verbalize, the fear that the trip would reopen wounds that had barely begun to scar over. She wasn't afraid of England. She wasn't afraid of Harry returning to his family. She was afraid of what it would do to him. Harry knew she wasn't wrong to worry. Every time he returned to the UK, he felt something tighten inside him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't resentment. It was something softer and more painful, the hope that things might finally change. And hope, he had learned, was sometimes the cruelest burden. He shifted in his seat and sighed deeply, trying to focus on the reason he was traveling. The gravity of the situation had pushed everything else aside. He would face whatever he needed to face. He would deal with whatever awaited him. He would push past the fear of rejection, push past the uncertainty, push past the simmering questions that threatened to swallow him whole. But as the plane continued its journey over thousands of miles, Harry couldn't help but drift into thoughts of his childhood with Charles. He remembered the warmth of his father's laugh, rare but genuine. The way Charles would kneel to speak to him at eye level. The mornings when they would walk through the gardens, talking about everything from plants to history to small, silly things only a child would care about. People often forget that royal relationships are still human relationships. That even kings and princes have private moments, quiet routines, and fragile connections. Harry missed those moments. He missed the simplicity of being a son before the world had reshaped him into a role he never fully asked for. But the years had changed everything. The press scrutiny, the institution's rigidity, the weight of expectation, the clash between duty and freedom, all of it had eroded their bond, grain by grain. And though Charles was now king, wearing the crown that had hung over his entire life, Harry still saw the father beneath the royal mantle. A father he desperately wanted to believe still cared enough to open his doors. As the dark sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn somewhere over the Atlantic, Harry felt the exhaustion settling into him. But sleep remained impossible. His mind was too loud. He thought of William, the brother who had once been his closest confidant, his partner in mischief, his anchor after their mother died. Their relationship had fractured in ways neither had expected nor intended. Would William want him back? Would he see Harry's return as a sign of reconciliation? Or would he see it as an intrusion, a complication, a disruption to the carefully maintained order of the royal household? Harry pressed his fingertips to his temples, trying to massage away the heaviness building behind his eyes. Another question surfaced. What would the public think? He knew that every move he made was analyzed, debated, criticized, praised, attacked, defended. He knew that stepping back onto English soil would unleash a new round of commentary. But he didn't care, not this time. Not when the stakes were higher than any headline. Still, the fear lingered. What if he wasn't wanted? What if he was walking into a situation that would hurt more than help? What if the call he had received wasn't an invitation, but a warning? The possibilities churned inside him as the hours crawled by. Finally, as the plane began its slow descent toward the UK, a new sensation swept over Harry. Not relief. Not comfort. Something sharper. Something colder. Apprehension. He pulled out his phone, turning it on as soon as the signal returned. Messages lit up instantly. Some from people checking in. Some from contacts monitoring the situation. And then, one message stood out, short, direct, unsettling. It simply read, "There may be complications when you land." Harry froze. Complications? His heart began to pound. His breath quickened. He felt a tingle of adrenaline rush through him, the kind that signals danger even before your mind understands what is happening. He typed back quickly. What kind of complications? The reply was delayed, which only heightened his anxiety. Finally, the response came. Decisions have been made. You may not be able to go where you intend. Harry stared at the words, stunned. Decisions. Not misunderstandings. Not delays. Decisions. And then it hit him. This wasn't about logistics. This was about authority. Someone in the hierarchy had intervened. Someone with power. Someone with the ability to override protocol and access. Someone like King Charles. Harry's pulse thundered in his ears as the plane touched down. He could feel the tension snapping inside him like an overstretched wire. Whatever awaited him outside those airplane doors was not what he expected when he boarded the flight. He had come home for a reason. But now, as London's grey morning light spilled across the runway, Harry sensed the truth he hadn't wanted to consider. Coming home didn't mean he would be allowed in. He didn't step off the plane yet. He sat still for a moment, hands clasped tightly, eyes staring ahead. He had come to England as a son answering a call. But what he was about to face was something colder, something harsher, something shaped not by family but by the monarchy's unyielding machinery. And somewhere, in a palace miles away, the king had already spoken. Harry's journey was far from over. It was only the beginning of the confrontation he never wanted, but could no longer avoid. As Prince Harry's flight crossed the Atlantic, a different kind of urgency was unfolding thousands of miles away. In London, behind closed doors and hidden corridors, a quiet ripple of activity was stirring across the palace and government circles. It was a tension that few would ever notice unless they were already paying attention to the subtle language of power. The hurried movement of aides, the low murmur of urgent conversations, the sudden scheduling of unplanned meetings, and the restrained panic of those responsible for protecting the monarchy's image. It began with a message. Not an email, not a public announcement, but a discreet alert to a handful of senior officials. Harry was returning, and the circumstances were unusual. The call had been flagged as urgent, personal, and sensitive. The message spread quietly at first, carried through trusted channels like a whispered secret, a signal that the gears of the palace needed to shift before the situation reached the media or, worse, the public. In the rooms where the monarchy's advisors operated, every gesture was calculated. Every whisper carried weight. Phones buzzed. Staff shuffled documents. Plans were drafted, revised, and redrafted. Security assessments were updated with the utmost secrecy. The goal was clear: contain, control, and manage the unexpected return before it could become a public spectacle. Harry's journey was far from a normal visit. He wasn't arriving for a ceremonial engagement, a charity event, or a state function where security protocols were already in place. He was returning for something personal, urgent, and emotionally charged. That alone made the preparation delicate. Too much attention risked a media storm, too little, and the prince could find himself in a vulnerable position. The palace team, however, was not working blindly. Every movement of Harry's anticipated journey was cross-referenced with flight data, private contacts, and the limited intelligence that could be gathered discreetly. Even as Harry slept on the plane, aides in London were plotting routes, coordinating with security, and consulting legal advisors about what permissions were required, what access could be granted, and how to handle any potential confrontation. But what made the situation even more complex was the human element. This was a family matter, not just an operational one. The king himself had been briefed. He understood, as all monarchs understand, that any decision made at this level would ripple through history, through public perception, and, most importantly, through the fragile web of family relationships. The advisors knew that a wrong move could not only endanger Harry but could also ignite tensions within the royal family and the media.